I think the left, the media, the left media wants to believe, they really do, not just believe, they want there to be Nazis everywhere. They really do want a massive movement of white supremacists, and they're looking wherever they can to find it. Because we have an article right here from Vox. Study, 11 million white Americans think like the alt-right. 11 million. And initially, I believe it said something like 24 million. They had to walk it back. It says, the Unite the Right marchers aren't alone, according to brand new research. This is from yesterday. It really does feel like everyone is a Nazi, everyone is a white supremacist, when they can't actually find any, because there's only, I think actually by the SPLC standards or measure, there's something like 10,000 or so white supremacists. And if I wanted to be generous, I think it might be like 13 or 14, including like the diaspora, meaning like peripheral, not necessarily white supremacists, but basically the same thing, people who claim they aren't or don't believe in superiority. Then when you start including like ethno-nationalists, it gets a little bigger, but it's still a very, very small number. When they say that 11 million white Americans think like the alt-right, and they show a picture from Charlottesville of a dude screaming while holding a tiki torch, they're trying to get people to believe that 11 million white Americans would do the same thing, would think the same way that would drive them to do that, and their logic, I'm sorry, there literally is no logic, none. I read through this. Let's go through this, and I'll tell you exactly why. This is just insane. They need a boogeyman, and there's always something. They included this editor's note. It says a data error by the author of the study cited here inflated the percentage of non-Hispanic white Americans with alt-right compatible views up by 12%. The actual figure is 5.64%. All numbers in the piece and headline have been updated to reflect the correct figures. Oh, because the numbers were wrong at first. I think it was like originally said 24 million, and now it's which that would make sense at 12%, or no, that doesn't necessarily make sense. Oh yeah, non-Hispanic white Americans. Okay, so they lowered the number. Let me just say, after reading through the article, I believe that it is fair to conclude, no. 11 million Americans do not think like the alt-right. That is a very manipulative way of phrasing this. And you know what really bothers me is when I see my friends post this identitarian bullshit. And I'm like, dude, this is not real. Okay? In the run-up to the 2018 Unite the Right rally in Washington, D.C. this Sunday, the sequel to last year's infamous Charlottesville, Virginia tiki torch demonstration, it's vitally important to try to figure out just how significant the movement known as the alt-right is as an American political force. It's not. There are certainly influential people who are alt-right, for sure, but there's not a lot of them. If people like white nationalist Richard Spencer are marginal cranks whose ideas have no resonance with a wider audience, the best thing to do might be to ignore them. But new research from the University of Alabama's George Hawley, published by UVA's Institute for Family Studies, suggests this isn't the case. According to Hawley, a political scientist who specializes in demography and the far right, demography, roughly 5.64% of America's 198 million non-Hispanic whites have beliefs consistent with the alt-right's worldview. Oh, let's say you believe in a strong government, a strong central government. Let's say you're a Democrat and you think there should be a strong government and strong government regulation. Congratulations, your beliefs are consistent with Nazi worldviews. You see how that doesn't make sense? That's not logic. If you think that people deserve, it's like that argument where if you say that you like eating food, well, the Nazis liked eating food too. This comparison is absolutely fake. It is I want to show you why, because it is. It's obviously difficult to measure how many people see themselves as alt-right. People are notoriously shy to express overtly racist attitudes to pollsters, and aligning yourself with the alt-right is aligning yourself with an openly racist movement. Yes, the alt-right are white ethno-nationalists. They believe that white people have a right to their own country and would exclude non-whites and mixed-race folk. I think it's fair to see who would believe in something like this. People who are white, feel like they're under attack, don't like the fact that identity politics is used to play up certain groups and not their group, or they're attacked for being a group while others are benefited for being a group. Yes, that's exactly what they started looking at. So let's see. To get around this problem, Hawley decided to measure polling on 3 different metrics that were more about identification with whiteness than anti-minority sentiments. This, he explains, is a way of figuring out who would be open to alt-right thinking while avoiding the problems of associated with just asking people if they're racist. Well, the thing is, racist is such a negative word that I've met actual racists who didn't want to call themselves racists, but would say racist things, and then I'd be like, you realize that's what racism means, right? And they would concede, okay, fine, they're racist. In this instance, he says, movements like the alt-right are correctly classified as racist. However, there are elements to these kinds of movements beyond simple racial animus, anxiety, or resentment. Although the racist right can be ideologically diverse and make many different arguments, there are three key sentiments that are widely shared across these movements. This is where it gets really interesting. I hope you're ready for this. Strap in, everybody. A strong sense of white identity, a belief in the importance of white solidarity, and a sense of white victimization. Although someone who rates high on all of these views may not necessarily identify with the alt-right or a similar movement, we can anticipate all or nearly all individuals who are involved in white identity politics too share these values. There's the proof. Let's invert this. What if someone has a strong sense of Asian identity, a belief in the importance of Asian solidarity, and a sense of Asian victimization? Does that then make them something akin to the alt-right? Is it possible that if you take that exact same criteria and apply it to any other group, you end up with identitarianism? So when we say the left and the the far left, regressive left, and the alt-right share very similar views, when Richard Spencer is on a live stream saying he doesn't believe in free speech and believes in a powerful state, and then we see people on the far left who say they also don't believe in free speech, I'm like, the only thing you guys disagree on is the color of your skin. And I think that's why Sargon made the joke where he's like, maybe they should team up because then they can segregate themselves. But let's take a look at this. This is absolutely wonderful logic they have going on. They said, someone who rates high on all these views may not necessarily identify with the alt-right or a similar movement, but we can anticipate all or nearly all individuals who are involved in white identity politics too share these attributes. When you're like a child, when you're very small, we learn basic logic, okay? They say, what's a good example? Some police are blue and some people are blue. Therefore, so it's, hold on, I gotta figure, I think, I'm gonna screw this up. I'm screwing this up. Basically, just because group A is blue does not mean that everyone in group B, who sometimes is blue, has anything to do with A, okay? Get it? The point I'm saying is, there are probably a lot of people who do recognize themselves as white, who do believe that it's important that, white people pay attention to identity politics, and do feel like white people are under attack, and would in no way ever engage in any of this memes or racism. Just because you recognize these things doesn't mean you believe half, if not anything, that the alt-right believes other than those three things, right? This is a huge gap in logic. You can't just take three criteria and say that's what makes, everyone in the alt-right believes this, therefore people who believe this are in line with the alt-right. Sorry. But you know what? Those are some pretty strong positions, right? Because I don't agree, I don't know if everybody actually has, white people hold these views. And I would say that one of the things that the alt-right really tries to do is what they call racial consciousness. They want white people to recognize their identity. They want them to believe in banding together, and they want them to feel victimized. And this is why the alt-right loved what the New York Times did. You've got all these people saying that, the New York Times, it's bad faith actors who are pretending to be offended, and they're just white supremacists, and that's a lie. I'll tell you what's going on. In my opinion, you've got the identitarian left and the identitarian right trying to fight over superiority, and they're trying to manipulate everyone in between who isn't an identitarian. And it really breaks my heart to see some of my good friends espousing this far-left identitarian nonsense. And how do you approach someone and say, there are two sides, and identitarianism is bad, okay? It separates us, it makes us fight each other, and we need to come together. How do you do that? I don't know. Because I know that if I go to them and say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation, it's going to trigger them. They're going to enter tribal mode and freak out. And it makes it really difficult. The point is, just because they did an estimate and found that there are white, okay, look, there are probably white people who are like, wow, what the New York Times is doing, with supporting Sarah Jung is wrong. And so they view that as whites, being victimized by someone who's going to spew that racist stuff. They might think that, they probably should pay attention to race and vote, for each other, and they recognize themselves as white. But it doesn't mean that they are racist. It doesn't mean that they believe themselves above other people. It doesn't mean that they would put on a polo shirt and march around talking about the Jews. And it doesn't mean they would engage in anything like we're seeing on the ground. This, to me, is such an insane leap. I could tell you that there are Mexicans, Asians, black people, Pacific Islanders, whatever, who believe that they're victimized, who believe that they are, they need to have solidarity within their community, and they believe in their identity, who aren't regressive left, who aren't far left, and aren't going to go out and, put on Antifa masks and fight people. I feel like the media is so desperate to try and create a villain that they produce these articles. And let's look at some of the weasel words real quick, because, look, I recognize that to an extent, right, there is an opportunity for the alt-right to grab these people, and that's what they want. They want the racial consciousness. That's what they call it. And so, sure, these people are probably more at risk than many others, but I love how they frame it like, what does it say? They think like the alt-right. And that somehow implies that just because they recognize that there's identity politics going on in this country, it means, then they show this picture, right? They show this picture of a tiki torch guy, a bunch of them, and they're screaming, and that's like a pretty, visceral, scary photo, that invokes fear. And then what happens when you hear there's 11 million people and they show you this photo? Look, man, there's going to be some dude with a big beer belly sitting on his couch drinking a beer going like, oh yeah, I've seen that stuff. And that's the extent to which they actually participate in anything having to do with identity politics. There was a guy told me the other day, this guy that I've been working on a project, and he said, one thing that poor people do that rich people don't, read the news, watch the news. So if you're one of these middle class New York types, urban folk, and you're watching and you're reading this stuff, you're probably freaking out. But when you go down to the ground level and talk to people, none of this makes sense and none of it matters. Because just because someone might believe some of these things doesn't mean they'll ever engage in anything having to do with the alt-right. It doesn't mean that these things they believe in, let's put another thing into perspective. The alt-right is ethno-nationalistic, right? It means it's identified as people who believe there should be a country for white people. That's at least how many people define it. I know it's kind of nebulous, but we'll go with the most widely used definition of white nationalism. Believing in identity, believing in solidarity, and believing that whites are victimized doesn't mean you actually believe in an ethno-state. So to say that they think like the alt-right it's not quite there. So I guess maybe they can say that there is a white identity diaspora. How does that sound? But that's not surprising because most people are playing identity politics. Let me just end by saying this. Don't play identity politics. It's such a bummer when I watch what's going on in politics because you can see the tactics used by the fringe elements and how it works. How the alt-right is able to recruit, how the regressive left is able to recruit, how it seems like social media companies are willing to support regressive ideas. It's mind-numbing. And then you're sitting back refusing to engage in this behavior. But when people use dirty tactics, when they play dirty, they have the upper hand. And if you don't engage in this behavior, it's worrisome. But you know what? At the end of the day, we have a problem. Because there are certain people who can't play into either, right? Here's another thing I want to point out. Let's say there are people in here who recognize these things, these three criteria, but they hate the idea of ethno-nationalism. So they think like the alt-right, but they hate the alt-right. That's a possibility too. And the same can be said for the left. Because according to the tenets of the regressive left, I should be a shoo-in to be heard by this community, but they absolutely detest my ideas because I don't like identity politics. So, look, we look at Candace Owens, we look at people like Ian Miles Chong, there are minorities who speak out among the regressive left or counter them, and they're called racist white supremacists too. Suffice it to say, everybody is trying to freak everybody out. Everybody should chill out. It's not as bad as everyone thinks, but when the fringe elements rise up, it could make things bad. So, I don't know, man. Vox, they're ridiculous. Why do I read this website? Anyway, stick around. I got a couple more videos coming up in just a few minutes.